Hey guys, what's going on? It's Dave from Evil Eye Games. So, I haven't done any videos in a while, and I've been spending a lot of time working on static meshes, basically messing around in Blender and trying to figure out how to use Blender. And I do have some new meshes that I have made for the game, as we'll see. But in the last video, I wanted to bring up something that I mentioned and we never actually addressed, and that was collision with our checkpoints. And I figured since I was going to cover collision with the checkpoints, I haven't really done an overview of what collision is and how it works within Unreal Engine. So, in order to talk about collision, I have this page up here which talks about how collision works within Unreal Engine. And this page goes through several examples on how to set up collision between objects and how it essentially works. First of all, there's the collision presets, which I'm going to show you how to set up in a little bit. There's the collision enabled, which obviously sets up whether or not collision is actually enabled. There's an object type, and it sets up what type of object it is, and you can use that to set other objects on how they respond to your object type. Now, we've seen this before, where we have object responses down here, and there are object types of world static, world dynamic, pawn, physics, body, vehicle, destructible, etc. Now, if the object type up here is set to world static, anything else that interacts with it is going to be determined by how that object interacts with world static objects. So, in this specific example, in the picture here, they have a sphere and a wall. And the wall is set up to be a world dynamic type, and the sphere is set up to be a physics body. Now, both of them have collision enabled, but the important thing to note is that each one of these objects is set to block the other type of object. So in the collision response settings down below, it's in the block category. So if the sphere is moving at the wall and it ends up coming into contact with the wall and the sphere are going to end up blocking each other. And the important thing to note about this is the settings for each both have to be set to block in order for it to actually stop it. Now, if the wall, for example, was set to overlap with the sphere, what it's essentially going to do is allow the sphere to pass through and just generate an overlap event. Essentially, when these collision settings take place, it takes the closest to ignore as possible. So if one is set to block and one is set to overlap, it's going to take the lowest level of interaction. So if the wall is set to overlap, the sphere will move towards the wall, and it will generate an overlap event instead of a hit event. And the sphere will actually be able to pass through the wall, which I believe is another example that they have further down this page. So right here in this specific example, they have actually set up the sphere to generate overlapping events, even though the wall is set to block. So what ends up happening is the sphere moves towards the wall. When they begin to overlap, the sphere says, I generate an overlap event, even though the wall says it generates a block event. And it works the opposite way as well. So if the sphere is set to block and the wall is set to overlap, it will only generate an overlap event. So we're going to take a look at this in the game and how our save checkpoint is set up. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to open the blueprint for our save game checkpoint. And if we go into the viewport, we can take a look. We have this box right here that generates our overlap events to save for the character. Now, if we come down to our collision section here, I'm going to go ahead and expand this down. And we're actually going to open up the collision presets here. So right now, it is set for an overall dynamic. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set this to a custom. And we're fine with querying no physics. We're not really dealing with physics. And our object type is a world dynamic, which is perfectly fine. But if we notice down here at the bottom, our weapon channel is set to block. So the default response from our projectile, I'm going to go ahead and open up our projectile. So we'll find the base projectile. And once again, I'm going to go ahead and find the collision sphere. And we're going to take a look at our collision here. It's set to default block everything except for our weapons channel. So right now, the checkpoint is a world dynamic, and it's set to block our weapon channel. The projectile itself is a weapon channel, and it's set to block the world dynamic. So when these two things come together, it generates a hit event. So when it fires the hit event, the script in our event here, where we have an on hit, will end up firing. So we really don't want to change up the way our projectile works. We want it to interact with everything in the world except for specific circumstances. So for our specific circumstances, we don't want the save game checkpoint to interact with our weapons object. So I'm going to go into the save game here, and we're going to go ahead and set the weapon channel to ignore. So now this collision box will now ignore any weapon channel objects that come into contact with it. It won't fire any hit events, and it won't fire any on overlap events. Now, likewise, in the base projectile, we could set up the world dynamic to overlap for that world dynamic object. But the problem with this is we're going to have other world dynamic objects in the world, and we want it to react with it. So we're going to leave this to block all. So at this point, if I compile and save, I'm going to take a look at our map, and I put in a checkpoint right here, right after the player start. And I have also put one in down here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit play, and we're going to go ahead and test this out. So right now there is a checkpoint that is directly in front of me. So if I fire the weapon, we're firing, but you'll notice it's firing really crazy. And the reason that this is firing really crazy is because we didn't handle the weapon trace. And the weapon trace is the line trace that is fired from our camera out and calculating the direction in which we want our projectile to shoot. So right now, our camera is drawing a line out, and it's hitting on our save game checkpoint. So when it goes to calculate the direction with which the projectile fires, it's firing from the barrel of the weapon to that point on the save game checkpoint, which makes it look like it's firing off at a crazy angle like this. So once again, we're going to have to go into our save game checkpoint, and we're going to come down to our collision presets here. And you'll notice right now the weapon trace is set to block as well. Well, we want this to ignore any of the weapon traces because we want all the weapon traces to essentially pass through it without anything happening. So I'm going to set the weapon trace here to ignore. I'm going to go ahead and compile and save, and we'll hit play again. And now if I go ahead and fire the weapon, it'll continue to fire straight through the weapon checkpoint with no issues. So right now, what happens is the projectile and the weapon trace are set up to impact practically everything in the environment other than other weapon items, so the weapon trace and the weapon objects. But when it runs into something that it's supposed to interact with, it checks against that object, in this case the save game checkpoint, and the save game checkpoint says I'm set to ignore the projectile and I'm set to ignore the weapon trace. So the projectile and the weapon trace just pass straight through the checkpoint without interacting with it. And I'm just going to keep moving ahead here, and if you noticed up at the top left there was a save game successful. So it successfully interacted with our player character. So it's not interacting with the weapons, but it is interacting when the player character passed through it. And I'm going to go ahead and just take a look around here. I made some new static meshes. As you can tell, I'm not the greatest 3D artist in the world. I'm pretty much just beginning, but I'm trying to get my hands on it and I'm trying to get used to it. So I've got some static meshes in here and some lighting effects on our objects. And as we're coming up to this area here, there is another save game checkpoint that is in front of my character. So if I fire, it will pass through that save game checkpoint. But as I move forward, it'll go ahead and give me a game save successfully. And then I'll just go ahead and get rid of these guys over here. And you'll see that I have some more static meshes that in here. I'm just kind of working on everything and trying to figure out how to generate some decent static meshes for the game. Unfortunately, with the character meshes, I am not all that great at characters yet. And I haven't really been able to generate anything that doesn't look like total garbage. So, I'm going to continue to work on that. If there is anybody out there who's actually a 3D artist and they have any advice or ways to get through this on how to get into character modeling, that'd be great if you want to leave a comment below. Now, one other thing we may want to do is set up custom presets for our collision channels. If we use something regularly enough where we want it to react a certain way, we can set up a preset within our project settings so that we can just use this preset in any situation where it applies. Now, at the moment, we are using specific settings for our overlap box here for our save game checkpoint. So looking at the save game checkpoint here with our custom settings, we're basically going to want to modify this a little bit. We want to ignore the visibility and the trace cameras here, but we want it to overlap with everything except for the weapons channel that we have. So we want it to ignore that. Now, if we think about this, what else are we using that's following the same kind of pattern? And if we just look into the level here, we have the collision boxes for our doorways. We don't want them to react to the weapons, but we want them to react to the character. And we also have the cover objects with these cover boxes on the end here that detect when the player passes into them. So we don't want them blocking the weapon fire, and we don't want them interacting with the weapon trace to calculate where the weapon fire is going. So we're going to create a custom preset that we can use along all of these objects. So I'm going to go up to Edit, Project Settings, and then we're going to go down to Collision. And at the bottom here, we have our preset. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to hit New for the preset over here. And we're going to have to give it a name. So I'm going to call this our Custom Overlap Preset. Then for collision enabled, all of these are query onlys. And for the object type, we can set it for world static is fine. It doesn't particularly matter in this instance. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set it to default to overlap at the top here. And then we're going to modify it down here. So we don't want these collision boxes to interact with any of the line traces. So I'm going to set the line traces to ignore, and we're also going to set the weapon channel here to ignore. And I'm going to go ahead and hit accept. And I just want to double check on that channel that's there. We actually have it set as a world dynamic. So if you want to edit these, you can select it and hit edit. And for the object type here, I'm just going to set it over to a world dynamic and hit accept. So now we have this preset that exists that we can use on multiple objects to set them to interact the same way. So if I go ahead and I open up our save game checkpoint again, and we come to the collision presets here, if I go ahead and select our custom, it doesn't look like it showed up there. We might have to go ahead and compile and save and take a look at it again. Okay, so after I compile, it showed up in the list. So we're going to select our custom overlap preset, and it fills everything out for us. So we're query only, we're world dynamic, it ignores our three traces here, and it overlaps with everything except for our weapon channel, which it ignores, which is exactly what we want. So I'm going to go ahead and compile and save this. And then I'm going to go ahead and open up our base cover object. And we can select each one of these cover boxes that we generated over here. So we have a total of 6 on this cover object. So for the collision presets here, we can go ahead and select our custom overlap preset. And we're going to have to do this with each one of the overlap boxes that we've created. And once we have them all set, I'm going to go ahead and compile and save that. And finally, we can do it with our base door blueprint object. So if we select the box for our overlap here, we can go to our collision presets here, and we can go ahead and select our custom overlap preset. And we can go ahead and compile and save. And I'm just going to hit save all in the main window. And let's try and test everything out and make sure it still works. So if we go ahead and hit play, we have a save point right in front of us, and I am able to fire through the save point. And if I walk through it, I get a game saved successfully. And we're going to walk up to the door here, and the door should trigger. So it goes ahead and it opens, and I can go ahead and take cover in our cover object. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this guy real fast for convenience sake. But if we fire through these cover boxes right here, it should fire straight through the boxes and not interact at all with those boxes. Likewise, same thing here for our trigger box that is triggering the door to open. So I can actually fire and it will hit the door and it will ignore the overlap box that triggers the door to open. And one other thing we can take a look at, since we're talking about collision, is the character collisions. So first I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open up a player character. So if we take a look at our capsule component right now, we're using a custom collision preset where it ignores all of the traces. And looking at the viewport, this is in reference to this capsule that surrounds the character. So right now, we're ignoring our visibility, we're ignoring a camera, and we're ignoring our weapon trace on this capsule. And then we're going ahead and we're blocking everything else. And we have these custom settings in place. But we want these settings to go ahead and be universal across all the characters. The same thing goes with the mesh as well. If we find the collision settings here, I might have been screwing around with them a little bit before, but I believe it should be set up so that all the trace responses here should be block. And then for the object responses here, it's blocking everything except for the pawn in the vehicle right now. But one thing we can do is we can go into our project settings, and in that collision, once again, we can go ahead and open up our presets here. Now there's a preset in here already for the character mesh. And if we double click on this, we can open up and edit how the character mesh reacts to things. So the character mesh itself should block the visibility, and it should block camera and weapon trace, and it should block our weapons channel as well. The object type for our character mesh, I believe, is pawn, so I'm going to hit accept, and I want to double check on that. So we do have it set up as a pawn. So if we go ahead and open up our character mesh again here, we should be set to block on all trace types, because we want the mesh to block visibility, camera, and weapon traces. And then we want it to block the weapons channel as well. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hit accept. And then we have to deal with the capsule for the player as well. But there's no preset capsule in here. So I'm going to create a new preset. And we're going to call this the character capsule preset. So for collision enabled, I'm just going to set it to query only. For the object type, I'm going to set it to a world dynamic. I believe that's what it's set for. but we can double check and make sure. That's always good to do. So if we go to the capsule here, if we revert it back to its default, it is actually a pawn. So I'm going to go ahead and for our character capsule preset here, we're going to go ahead and edit this. And for the object type, we're going to set it to pawn. And then we can add in a description here. I forgot to add one for our custom overlap preset. So we'll just say that it is the overlap for character capsule. So our character capsule, we actually wanted to ignore all of the line traces. We don't want the weapon or any of the visibility to impact on the capsule itself. And we want it to go ahead and block everything with the exception of the weapons channel. So I'm going to go ahead and set that to ignore and hit accept. So now that we have that set up, we have a modified setting for our character mesh, and we have a custom setting for our character capsule. So if we go into our player character and we select the capsule component for collision here, for our collision presets, we can go ahead and select our character capsule preset. So right now, this is going to automatically set it up so the character capsule ignores all of our trace responses, and it blocks everything except for the weapons channel. And then likewise, we can go into our mesh here, and we can go into our collision presets, and we can select, if I can find it in here, the character mesh. So our character mesh will block all of our traces, and it will block everything except for the pawn and the vehicle. So I'm going to go ahead and compile and save that. And then we can do the same thing for our enemy character as well. So I'm going to open up our base enemy character blueprint. I'm going to select the capsule component. And then for the collision presets here, I'm going to set it to our character capsule preset. And then for the mesh, I'm going to go ahead and set it to our character mesh. And compile and save. Now if we hit play, we should have the same interaction with our enemies as well. So if I go ahead and fire at this guy, it does damage to him and it impacts on his mesh and not on his capsule. And we can go ahead and test this out on the two other guys that are over here. So I can fire at this guy and the impacts actually take place on the mesh. They don't take place on the capsule itself. And the fire is calculated to hit him on his mesh. So that's going to complete today's video. If you have any questions or comments, you can go ahead and leave them down below, or you can head over to my Facebook page and message me and comment over there. And as always, guys, thanks for watching.